Are you happy with your existing vision, strategy, and values, or do you need to revisit them? Are you producing disciple makers, disciples, or consumers? Are you worried that what you're currently doing isn't sustainable or scalable? Do you need to overhaul your church, but aren't sure what to do differently? The fact is, we often lead the way we've been led, disciple the way we've been discipled, and teach the way we've been taught, unless we consciously do so otherwise. And with the accelerated pace of life, the unceasing demands of ministry, and the relentless fact that Sunday is always around the corner, who has the luxury of time to stop, audit, and make systemic changes to the way we lead, disciple, and teach? As a result, the two things that we often unintentionally end up neglecting is self-development and staff development. So let's talk about staff development. The fact is, as a pastor and church leader, you are both a boss and a disciple maker, and this applies whether or not you're the senior leader. In other words, think about everyone on your team, whether it's your staff team as a senior leader or your volunteer team as a staff member. On the one hand, you're responsible for the ministry that God has entrusted you to. So in order to get things done in a scalable manner, you can't do it yourself. You need to work with and through your team. Just think about Exodus 18 and the account between Moses and Jethro. This makes you the boss, the leader, or depending on your culture, the chief cheerleader or number one servant. And now, on the other hand, you are also responsible to equip those under you for the work of ministry. Think Ephesians 4:12-13. And I'm not talking about equipping others to make coffee, clean the toilets, and carry your purse or merce. I'm talking about equipping the saints for the work of ministry, to build up the body of Christ until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of God's Son, growing into maturity with a stature measured by Christ's fullness. So now, while making coffee and cleaning toilets can definitely be a character-shaping exercise and be a part of moving you to maturity, that's not what I want to spend the rest of our time on. I want to talk about ways you can build a staff culture that allows your team to develop both professionally and spiritually. In my book, No Silver Bullets, 5 Small Shifts That'll Transform Your Ministry, I have a chapter entitled From Sage to Guide. In this chapter, I unpack what it looks like to move from being a sage on the stage to a guide on the side when it comes to discipleship and leadership development. There's this concept in this chapter that I'd like to share with you. It's called the 70-20-10 principle. Now, this principle originated with Dr. Alan Tuff in his book, The Adults Learning Projects, and has since been elaborated and expanded on by many others. The principle states that 70% of our learning comes by doing. Now, this is informal, on-the-job development that comes through trial and error, like when we're growing in experience, like when we're preaching, fleshing out strategic areas, key ministry area, action plans, recruiting leaders, discipling others, or when we're teaching a class, right? It's learning that comes by doing. That's the 70%. The next 20% of our learning happens when we receive informal feedback from others, or through formal coaching, mentoring, and employment relationships. This is primarily the type of development that happens through interacting with others. It's about receiving feedback and actually doing something with it, right? That was 20, and the last 10% of our learning is through conferences, seminars, and courses. This is the structured side of formal education. So is this principle true for you? Think about this. Why do you preach the way you preach? Why do you disciple the way you disciple, lead the way you lead? Is it because you follow the steps outlined in a textbook or from a course? Is it because someone's coached you, or because you've just done it over and over again and learned what works and doesn't through trial and error? Most likely it's a combination of all three, but according to this principle, one of the most significant ways to develop is just by doing it. I'm not talking about swinging the pendulum the whole other way, doing something without actively seeking out feedback, coaching, and new perspective through conferences, seminars, or courses. I mean, that's just simply unwise, and that's why it's not the 100-0-0 principle. All that to say, if you want to develop in an ongoing manner, don't just relegate development to formal education. Think of the 70-20-10 principle. What's interesting, though, is that most churches are unintentionally aware of the 70-20-10 principle and are actually living it out, but their application of it is backwards. 70% of their time is devoted to teaching, 20% to talking about it, and 10% to doing it. So what would happen to your church if you applied the 70-20-10 principle accurately? What if 70% of the time that you spent developing your team and discipling them was helping them do the very things that made them a great leader and disciple maker? You would then talk about what they've done and provide feedback 20% of the time while only formally teaching them 10% of the time. Imagine the transformation that would happen in your church. Imagine what kind of culture would develop in your church.